I'd love to take a moment now to introduce our special guest, Assemblymember Ash Kalra, who represents San Jose, is a good friend and a stalwart champion for working folks. First Indian American to serve in the legislature, chair of Assembly Labor Committee, and the Legislative Progressive Caucus. Assemblymember Kalra, my goal for you joining us is to share from the perspective of an elected official. So a lot of advocacy groups do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
We want to cut through all of that and get through what is the most effective in terms of the way for people to organize at the local level that actually motivates the elected to do what you want them to do. And in your case, we don't necessarily always have that issue with you because you're always doing the right thing. We know that there's a number of electeds that don't always do the right thing. And our goal is, how do we build community power so that the pressure from the community compels the elected to take the courageous votes, to take the hard votes, even when they have big corporate or other interests in their ear. What would you say from your perspective is the way that people can most powerfully influence your actions in Sacramento?
It depends on the individual. And when I say the individual, I mean the elected official, right? And I think that we'd like to believe that every elected official is looking at things in the same way and looking at things simply in terms of what the best policy is. The reality is that that's not what politics is always about. You do have folks that are going to be looking at it from different angles, including what impact it has politically and what have you. And I'm someone that actually came from the grassroots, meaning I was working as a public defender for 11 years before I ever became a council member. And I started a neighborhood association where I lived. Part of the reason why is that we had a lot of issues in the neighborhood. And I felt with the neighborhood association, you can amplify your voice. It's not just one resident or a handful of random residents calling their council member, but you actually have an amplified voice. I also work a lot in terms of activism at the local level far before I was an elected official. And so looking at the different experience I have now, being an elected official for almost 13 years, and then the decade or more before that, being active at the grassroots level, I think that there's a wide range of lessons I've learned. But I think that the first thing is relationships, right? I think that when you know someone, and I don't mean relationships, sometimes you think politics relationships that, okay, someone that wrote a big check, what have you. Relationship is simply just knowing someone. I think that showing up is the number one thing you can do. A lot of council members, a lot of electeds have coffee, open houses at their offices, or coffee with the council member, whatever it might be. Show up to those things. I think when you show up and build relationships genuinely, it's actually interesting to get to know who your representatives are, what makes them tick, what their motivation is, who supports them. Because when someone's running for office, you have different stakeholders, different interest groups. Well, who was behind them when they ran? Because that tells, again, you judge someone oftentimes by who their friends are, who their circle of friends are. It helps you understand what makes them tick. But when you get to know someone and your first interaction isn't that you want something from them or you're advocating for something, that's critically important, because they'll know that you actually have a genuine interest in civics, a general interest in what they're doing. Now, obviously, and I know some of the folks that are on the call here do have a very specific agenda, specific policy issues, specific organization they advocate for. But even then, when I'm in Sacramento, it's great to get to know folks, out and about. I've had coffee with folks, not with any agenda on their mind or mine. And so getting to know folks so that when there is an issue that you need to contact them for or lobby for, you're not a stranger. It's a familiar face. It doesn't always mean they're going to do what you want or agree with you. But it absolutely creates the opportunity to have the space to have a real conversation on the issues that matter to you.
Right. I love that. And in fact, that's going to be part of the presentation as we move forward, is doing the community coffees and the local events that the electeds have. Those are so important, and nobody ever takes advantage of that. I totally agree with you. You want the elected to know your face in addition to your name. And especially at the local level, if you are going to be out and about and active and engaged, then shoot, go walk up and shake hands. Hi, this is who I am. This is what I care about. Pleasure to meet you. Do you have a dog? I have a dog, whatever, right? Like it doesn't have to feel gross or fake. It could just be, this is what I care about.
Yeah,
I love that.
Right. The other thing I'll add to that, especially if you're going to our events, whether it's a town hall or a community event, we have a whole wide range of events that we do. Make sure that you meet our staff in the district office, the district director and field representatives in Sacramento. Get a chance to know our staff. Our staff, when I'm in Sacramento, Capitol staff, they have different issue areas that they are responsible for, right? They focus on the policy issues, and not just those that I'm on the committees for, But, we see a wide range of issues. So we get bills that come forward and they help to staff me and brief me on those bills. In the fall, when we're not in session, feel free to reach out to them and say, hey, I focus on environmental issues. I understand you're the environmental lead for Assemblymember Kalra's office. I'd love to get coffee and just introduce myself.
Love it.
Don't do that. And they
Yeah.
they think that it's only important to know us. When in reality, our staff does so much of the work and we listen to our
You
staff.
could say they might be more important, actually.
Yeah. And oftentimes, yeah.
So let me ask you, here's my behind the scenes question for you. Are emails effective? Is it really just phone calls? What would you say is like the best bang for your buck?
Our staff monitors all of it. I think that phone calls are helpful because it's a very personal, you literally take your time to call. Emails, personalize the email as much as you can. We do get slews of emails, and now you'll get a certain network or a certain group will say, okay, email your representative. And so we'll get 100 emails that look exactly the same, right? And does that matter? Yes, that matters. That helps. It's much more impactful if you just send a personalized email or if you call. And also it matters what district you live in, whether you're on the city council, whether you're calling a council member, whether you're calling your state representative. We want to know if you're a constituent. And that's what
There you go.
we ask, where do you live? Because we actually document it. We have a whole system, a program where we document when we get input from constituents. If we get a constituent calling us for a tax issue they have or EDD, that gets documented in our system until we resolve the issue. But it's the same when it comes to people advocating for certain bills. We document, okay, we got 50 people calling against this one particular bill, but you know what? Only 2 live in our district. And so it's really important that you call the representative of the district you live in. And that's why it's important to create a network, right?
Yeah.
Create a network statewide and say, okay, well, I don't live in Kalra's district, but in our network, we have 6 people that do. Let's inform them on this bill coming up. And if they so wish, they can call their representative.
So you went into my next question because I get this a lot. If you're not in the district, is it even worth calling or connecting?
It's still worth it, but you want to always start, again, all politics is local. You want to start with your own representative first. It still matters, but we're going to pay closer attention if we're getting 30, 40 calls from our district. Okay, well, there's something that clearly our constituents are really tuned in on and have an opinion on, as opposed to sometimes we'll get calls from out of state from folks that don't like what we're doing. Is okay, well,
that's great, but I don't care. Right. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Assemblymember, is people tend to not pay attention to city council, supervisor. For some reason in our society, we think federal president, who's in Congress, that's all that matters. When we don't even realize that actually more impact and more control over your life is done at the most local levels possible. And that if we are trying to impact that, that's where we need to start.
And that's part of our poor civics education in this country. I remember in high school and all that, you learn about Congress, Supreme Court, but you don't learn about your city council or your school board members and water district, all these things that have so much influence over your daily life.
Right.
In many cases, much more than federal representatives. Look, I was a neighborhood activist and on a bunch of nonprofit boards. Then I was on a planning commission, a human rights commission, then planning commission. Then I ran for city council, and now I'm in the state assembly. Most of us in legislative seats, whether it's congressional or state, started somewhere, whether it's school board, whether it's a city commission. So remember that when you're looking at planning your city council, and in San Jose, we have 10 city council members and the mayor. Well, there's a pretty good chance that one of them may be in the state legislature someday.
Right.
Or maybe in Congress someday. Pay attention to that for the long view of it. The immediate view is that they're making decisions right now that matter on a wide range of issues. Make sure you're electing the best representatives locally, because even at the state level, if we put down legislation regarding housing, for example, affordable housing, we have a Democratic majority legislature that's very much pro affordable housing. We're trying to get funding down for that. But if you have a city that doesn't want to implement it, you're not going to get affordable housing in your city. I live in San Jose. The big cities in the Bay Area are building affordable housing, but a lot of the smaller jurisdictions aren't. And that is because who's being elected.
That's right. And never mind things like redistricting. We have I don't want to say luck, but we have an independent redistricting commission. We're one of, I think, maybe 2 states that even have that. In the other states, it's who the state officials are that determine political districts. And that's why you get these really crazy gerrymandered districts. Absolutely. I want to be super respectful of your time. One last question. In terms of getting involved with election type stuff, A lot of groups, as you know, don't have PACs. They don't have big financial dollars behind them. What they have is people power. And I think that the idea of getting involved in elections, like doing endorsements, candidate endorsements, it seems very intimidating and very like, oh, we're too small potatoes for that. I would say the opposite. I would say start creating infrastructure to vet candidates, especially at the local level. So you start putting your people in where you want them to be. Can you speak to that?
Especially if you don't have the money, right? I'm one of 2 legislators out of 120 that does not accept corporate PAC money, which means there's still a lot of money coming into our system from very large interests that have the money. But then you have groups like Sunrise Movement. Do you think elected officials want the endorsement of Sunrise Movement? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's because it's created this grassroots movement that now has a power to that name. And that can absolutely be done at the local level. We have local groups that are very effective in San Jose, for example, other parts of California that are very effective at bringing folks together. They host town halls, candidate town halls, right? You can host a candidate forum, get together with 3, 4, 5 other groups and host candidate forums. And at the end of it, you all get together and say, this is going to be the candidate we support because they're aligned with our values. You don't think a local elected is going to want that stamp of approval? Absolutely. It is intimidating, but at the end of the day, that's the only way that so many stakeholders and so many groups that are advocating for the community that are never going to match the money, but they're going to be effective. I mean, if you even look at labor, I mean, labor certainly has resources, but they don't have the same resources, especially at the local level, these large moneyed interests do. But what they do have is a brand. You want to have that labor brand support in many cases, right. And they have the people and they're organized. Right. If you organize the people to do phone banks, do walking, I'm telling you, I want that, especially if I'm running for city council.
Right.
I'm going to want a group that's going to say, hey, we're going to bring out 10 people every weekend to knock on doors for you. I want that more than I want 10 checks. You know?
There you go. There you go. There's a lot of value in people power for sure. And the other piece of it coming out of labor, if you have people power and PAC power,
yeah,
that's power. That's how you move agendas. And what my personal goal, right? I want to see more Ash Kalras in the legislature. I want to see, more political courage. California, the great blue progressive state, we can't even get basic anti-fracking, climate change, things that even other states have. And why is that? We need more people who are willing to have courage and take the hard votes, regardless of what might happen after the fact.
I'll tell you, it's challenging because, I mean, first of all, the one thing I always tell folks, I didn't get elected to get reelected. I got elected to do what I believe is the right thing. And, I get threatened over my career. People are like, we're going to run someone against you. We're going to spend money against you. $6 million to spend against you when I ran for assembly. And so that's okay. I'd rather do it the right way and not win or lose my reelection.
That's right.
Than compromise myself. But the reality is that there is a lot of fear based, I'm not even saying this as a criticism, but there's a lot of fear that's used to maintain the status quo. It is scary to go up against very powerful interests that have shown they can be successful in defeating incumbents. So what we have to do is create the space for people to be courageous.
Yes.
And only going to do that if we show that we have a movement behind them.
That's right.
Don't worry, do the right thing. We've got your back.
That's right. 100%. We have to create space. I love what you just said. Create space for people to be courageous, because that's what we need right now is courage. So before you go, do folks have any questions for the Assembly member?
Good morning, Mr. Kalra. How are you? In your mind, what constitutes a successful grassroots visit by stakeholders coming to your office? What are the ones that you really remember? And what are some key takeaways that attendees can get from how to be better at their lobbying?
That's a great question. I try to say yes to as many meetings as I can personally with folks. So I've seen the whole range. And I know it's challenging, especially when you get members coming up to Sacramento advocating. It's a little bit harder for them to be off the cuff. But for folks like you that do have the experience, be very clear what you're asking for. Early on, get a sense of how well the member or the staff member is aware of the issue or the bill that you're talking about. Because in some cases, I'll know a bill inside. I've even had people lobby me on my own bills. Like, have a sense of how much you need to lobby this particular member or their staff, as opposed to spending the first 10 minutes of the meeting telling them something they already know. Now, in some cases, you may need to do that. And that's why it's kind of hard to gauge. And that's why folks like you, especially if you're having members from around the state there, may have to kind of guide it a little bit in terms of how you do the lobbying. But I think you never know how much time you have with us. As you know, sometimes we get called to a committee hearing. Sometimes a call comes from the governor's office, whatever. And so try to get to your ask as soon as possible and then open it up to a conversation, back and forth with the member. I think that allows for a more effective meeting where we get the chance to also share our thoughts on an issue. And if we don't agree, we can share why. Because sometimes the ask is done at the very end. And I'm like, it may be a bill that I'm not supportive of or have questions or concerns about, but we only have 2 minutes left to talk about those concerns. So I would say get to the ask sooner in the meeting than further on. And if you have a number of bills to talk about, try to get that to the staff member ahead of time. So the member or the staff member, if the member can't make the meeting, is well aware of what's being asked. Because sometimes I'll say early in the meeting, thank you so much for sending me, just, I'm supportive of all your bills. How can I be helpful? And then the meeting is spent on how I can be helpful on your bills rather than going over each bill. Now, again, it depends on the member. Maybe the member is not aware of the bills and it's going to be really helpful to go over that. But I think doing that work ahead of time and knowing ahead of time where each member or their staff is really helps have a more productive meeting.
That's super. Love that.
I have a question about how to engage city council, because locally our city council has made their top priority equity, diversity, and inclusion. However, we as a grassroots organization want to hold them accountable for what that means citywide. Now, the school district has addressed that with bullying, with racial profiling, and as well as the local city police. But we want, as stakeholders here in the city, to do something more, to expand the conversation more. And one of our ideas is to maybe do a town hall with either county or national leaders to engage the citywide community about what that means. So we have a tentative appointment with the mayor of our city to talk about this, but I'm wondering, because of the political tone to it, especially in our city, how would be the best way to talk about and tackle an issue like equity, diversity, and inclusion, and make it more educational versus political?
That's a great question. And I love the fact that you mentioned first. Everyone loves throwing those buzzwords around, especially politicians. Oh yeah, we're about diversity and inclusion, but then they never actually talk about what that actually means when it comes to policy. Because policy that gets enacted is diversity, inclusion, equity in reality. Otherwise, it's just words. And so one of the things in San Jose, I think we have different groups that do a good job of actually, Silicon Valley Rising. We have PACT. PACT does a really good job of bringing folks together. And when I was on the council, they'd invite council members when they'd have an issue. It could be housing, it could be any other kind of issue. They would talk about these issues. They'd break it down into work groups and all that. So if I went to the mayor of a city, I would say, okay, we're really happy that the city is embracing diversity, inclusion, equity. And so we would love to be able to have a town hall to actually engage the city on what that means. And we would love to have you there. It would mean so much to us. And they can decline, but that speaks to how much they actually believe it versus just say it. But I think if you have a group, an event where you bring the community together and actually have meaningful conversation, get a facilitator. And so it's not political. We're not saying we're supporting this issue or we're supporting this candidate, but rather it's like, we love our city and we want to talk about what these words mean to us as a city, and invite the mayor, invite the council members to be there. And so we would love to have you be part of this dialogue, and you break it down and you have different tables. You have a council member at one table, a mayor another, and talking to their constituents. And at the end of it, you say, okay, here's what came out of this. And let's then, the key is to always do follow-up after that. And so make it less intimidating for an elected official to come to, saying, hey, we're not going to put you on the spot at this particular meeting. Maybe later on you will, when you have a better sense of what your asks are in terms of diversity and inclusion. But I would say start with an inviting event where you bring the community together and have very meaningful dialogue on it. That's what I've seen has been successful in San Jose.
That's excellent. And I love what you just said about following up, especially if it's the first time you've had that conversation and you don't want to put them on the spot, but you clearly need to go back to them. You don't forget about it. And then you never, and then they're happy that you forgot and no one ever asked them to do anything. I want to be respectful of your time, Assembly Member. I am absolutely so grateful that you're here, and your bird's eye view of what this actually looks like in real life is super, super helpful. So thank you so much. And Safe day in LA and safe travels back to the.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. It's great to see you really helping to educate folks for everybody. Christina, you've done a great job over the years of being a very fierce advocate, as someone that always is respectful and everyone enjoys working with. So I think
Thank you.
that's a tough thing to balance. And I think but you have got to be fierce and be clear on your advocacy, but do it in a way that people don't mind seeing you again the next time you're advocating for something.
That's right. That's right. Good point. You make enemies a lot quicker than making friends. Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.